Before Whitey Herzog became a Hall of Fame manager, he was an outfielder. He was, in fact, a New York Yankees prospect, signing with them out of his Illinois high school in 1949. It was very hard to break into the Yankees' major league outfield. They were very deep. As Bill James wrote, when Herzog hit .351 with McAllister in 1950, no one really got too excited. That was in the Sooner League. And why should they have? Joe DiMaggio was in the majors, and Mickey Mantle, well, he was only 18 and there was no way of knowing how he would really turn out, but at that moment he was at Joplin hitting .383 with 26 home runs. So let's say the leading indicators were positive. Herzog also lost 2 seasons to his military obligations. It was the time of the Korean War. He came back and had a good year at AAA Denver in 1955, but it was still the Yankees and they were still full up. The 55 Yankees got great years from Mantle and Hank Bauer, while the third outfielder, Irv Noren, was just so-so, platooning with Ellie Howard. He was a good glove in the outfield who hit sometimes. He was great in 1954, hitting .319 with a .377 on-base percentage and a .481 slugging percentage with 12 home runs in 125 games. For his career as a Yankee, however, he hit only .272, .348, .402, perhaps a little bit less than you would like from a corner outfielder under ordinary circumstances. Would Herzog have been better than that? Well, he probably wasn't that kind of defensive player, and that is a real consideration. You have to include Noren's defense in your estimate of his abilities. However, in April 1956, the Yankees traded Herzog to the Washington Senators, who at that time played in Washington as opposed to Minnesota. He was the player to be named later after the Yankees had already sent 4 other extra players, extra to their needs, I mean. In return, they got left-hander Mickey McDermott and not really an infield prospect, Bobby Klein. Klein never played for the Yankees in the majors, just spent about 5 years filling out some of their minor league rosters. McDermott had come up at 18 with the Red Sox. His dad had fudged his birth certificate to get him signed at 15 years old, and he was a very well-regarded prospect. He fulfilled that promise to some extent, twice leading the AL in strikeout rate and having some good years at Fenway Park, but come up young and your arm falls off young too, and by the time he got to the Yankees, he was just an extra arm, a bullpen piece who got the odd spot start. As for Whitey, he had a bad rookie year at 24, and the Senators gave up on him after a couple of years, but he came to life following a trade to the A's and then during a subsequent stint with the Orioles. He had a nice 4-year run as a platoon outfielder, hitting .278 with a .384 on-base percentage and a .407 slugging percentage. That's not a bad OBP at all, right? After that, he spent a full year rarely getting off of the Tigers bench. He was used almost purely as a pinch hitter and retired to go into the career that we all remember him for. Herzog was close with Casey Stengel, both during his 7-year run in the Yankees organization and later on when he served various roles in the Mets organization. Before he was a manager with Texas and the Cardinals, he coached for the Mets. In the majors, he was a minor league manager. He was in charge of player development for a while, and this led to one of Herzog's best lines. Whitey recalled that as Casey sent him down at the end of spring training in 1952, Casey said, "But you have a good year and I'll get you back." The problem with that, Whitey said, I never had a good year. As we've already seen, that wasn't wholly true, but it must have seemed that way when he was wearing not the uniform of the American Association Kansas City Blues at the top of the Yankees minor league system, but the khakis of the United States Army at the very bottom of our military. That's a long way, a far cry from home plate. And when they take you out to that ballgame, sometimes you don't ever come back. So who can blame Whitey if he remembered that experience, even jokingly, as his time in the infinite inning? Hello there, and welcome back to the show, Infinite Inning number 384, in an ongoing series. Collect 'em, trade 'em, but don't trade me. I'm just starting to hit right here behind the microphone. Who am I? I am your convivial, dare I say, effervescent host, Stephen Goldman, as I have been for these many episodes over the years. This time travel trip to the past on a mission to better understand the present, the time machine being the national pastime, the game of baseball. And also Sierra mixed corn, which I just learned in working on this episode, is a special breed of, I believe, Mexican corn that is self-fertilizing by enveloping itself in its own bubble of mucus. And the pictures are just really disgusting. And I don't know if anyone eats this stuff, but I've learned a lot doing this show. I hope you have too. But quite often I regret some of the things that I learned. Somewhere, some corporate podcasting consultant is listening and saying, why would he even say that to them? They're clicking off by the score. They're swerving their cars into trees to make him shut up about the damn corn. He has such poor judgment. And maybe I do. Often I have. Not just in podcasting, but in other places. I just try to learn and get better. Just like a minor leaguer, we rise in life. We try to advance from the xylophone to the marimba to the vibes. Then we're cool. And if I've insulted all you marimba players out there in the audience, I am deeply, deeply sorry. I contritely apologize. You know, in our first segment, I mentioned the bit about Whitey Herzog going out to the ball game, the military ball game, and never getting back. And that is a realistic possibility. Fortunately, it didn't happen to him, but it, of course, has happened to many other people. And we're seeing it happen to folks today in our ongoing conflict with Iran. We've seen the government, at least in the last day or so, fiddle with the casualty numbers a little bit so that the official counts have gone down where they had once been at 18. I think now they're at 14. I don't really know what to believe, except that those were real people with real lives and real loved ones, and whatever the accurate number is or was, they are to be mourned respectfully. Simultaneously, they are not to be used in life, profligately. And that is always a concern. And I'm always struck by our leaders saying, I hate war. Franklin Roosevelt said that prior to December 7th, 1941. And I am not going to send our sons into danger unnecessarily. Of course, after Pearl Harbor, he didn't have to make that argument anymore. It was going to be WAH, W-A-H, in his way of expressing himself one way or the other. But more often, as you know, throughout our history, and this pertains not just to the United States, but to many countries or all countries, really often lives are spent on a whim of leadership. Even in that war, which seemed pretty necessary at the time, there were attacks that shouldn't have been made or were made in an ill-considered fashion, and FDR did not micromanage the military. He stood back and handled the political matters and let the soldiers do the soldiering. And yet there were still islands that we attacked at high cost, say. And then afterwards, as American boys lay dead in the surf, someone would say, did we need that island? One of the more famous told you so lines in history came in the 19th century when German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck, talking about the possibility of military action in the Balkans, said that that part of the world wasn't worth the bones of one Pomeranian grenadier. And everyone went, wait, where's Pomerania? Why is he so down on the Pomeranians anyway? I suspect it was his form of a Polish joke. That is the northern part of Poland, or it split between the northern parts of Poland and Germany, and they went back and forth on who had what, including the city of Danzig at the time, now firmly in Polish hands, and DBA Gdańsk should have been a sound effect on the 1966 Batman TV show. Biff, pow, Gdańsk. Holy Polish corridor, Batman. In any case, Otto's point was, don't do that. It's not worth it. And of course, after he had checked out, he had been let go by Kaiser Wilhelm II. He was more his dad's man. Kaiser Wilhelm definitely started a war over stuff going on in Serbia, as you well know from your high school history textbooks, if you so choose to remember them. And somewhere, looking up or down, I do not know, Otto had the last laugh. Told ya. As Wilhelm went from being the emperor of all of Germany to that of one house in Holland. And I have no sympathy for a lot of reasons, but the main one, of course, is that he was a key decision maker, a key decider in a war which cost millions of lives, human beings who had hopes and aspirations and people they loved. And it seems to me that when you are a leader, well, put that aside. Think about your most important personal relationship, whether it's a husband or wife, a girlfriend or boyfriend, whatever works for you. You and that person, whoever they are, you make a tacit arrangement, and often an explicit one, to protect and tend and care for each other's hearts and lives. Whatever happens, whatever bumps in the road you may encounter, you are not going to treat that person carelessly. Well, when you take over a country, I don't mean invading it. I mean, somehow you become the leader, hopefully by means fair and legal. You say, okay, you 330 million, I gotcha. I am not going to do anything that's going to harm you. I am going to do my best to make your life better. And very specifically, those of you who have signed up to guard this place, I'm not going to run you under the cannons. I'm not going to have you charge into the machine guns unless it's a really existential situation. And if that happens, I'm going to plan the hell out of it. I'm going to have experts telling me how to do it so that your lives, if they must be spent in the defense of the people, as we know sometimes must happen, it's because there was a real threat, a real need, and not just because I had some whim. I'd like to think that in some prior wars at least, that's why we got Whitey Herzog back. That's why we got Hank Greenberg and Warren Spahn and Ted Williams back. As I said earlier, that doesn't mean mistakes weren't made. They were made by the score. But there is a huge difference between, and I'll borrow from Germany again here, saying our nation is under attack. There are zeros over Wake Island. There are Stukas over Disneyland. There's a deep cut for some of you. And some nut saying, I think I'll invade Poland today. I think I'll invade France. The piece I wrote at Baseball Prospectus this week, which I'll get to in half a second, I mentioned Milton Friedman, the University of Chicago economist, very famous guy during his lifetime, who believed and wrote that corporations should be under no moral restraint whatsoever, that their only social responsibility was to make money for their shareholders. Anything else, he said, was socialism. That extended to, say, not curbing their use of pollutants if that cut into their profit margin. It's a very strange idea because it places shareholders over the world in which the shareholders live. It's like saying the virus can have no regard for its host, and yet the least successful viruses are the ones that infect the host and kill it, and then the virus dies with the ship which it's been sailing on. Other viruses, some of them live in your body for your whole life, and you never even know they're there. And of course, we have all sorts of beneficial bacteria in our bodies that help us digest food and so forth. In Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons' famous Watchmen graphic novel, Adrian Veidt, Ozymandias, is regarded as the smartest man in the world, or at least that's how he bills himself. During the story, someone says, well, there's going to be a nuclear war, and then, Adrian, you're going to be the smartest man on the cinder. And what use is it at that point to be the smartest man in a fallen world, in a post-apocalyptic situation in which everything is radioactive and there's nothing good, nothing to enjoy? You may survive. If you're that smart, I'm sure you've made arrangements. But again, to what end? Yesterday, as I speak these words, Elon Musk gave an interview in which he said, at least in part, I admit I've not listened to the whole thing, in the future when AI takes over, no one's going to work because they won't have to. AI will be doing all the work, including, I think he said, growing tomatoes. And a lot of people responded, has he ever grown tomatoes? Has he ever had a garden fresh tomato? And that's an interesting point, but it seems to me that if he was right, and I'm not saying this as a fan of capitalism, there are certainly a lot of days I could think of better things to do than do the things that I am paid for doing. And yet, if no one is working, then who is innovating? Who is creating? Who is telling the stories, drawing the pictures, animating those pictures that we live to see and experience? Because these machines, at least right now, all of them draw whatever, quote, creativity they have from already extant human creation. And once they've absorbed all of that and vomited it all back at us in reconfigured versions, and we're not working because we don't care to anymore, because we're too drunk on soporifics and well, androids, basically, where does it come from? What would be the point of living then? This is a concept that is untested in human history. Keep in mind that for most of the time that we've had as a species on this planet, just about all of it was devoted to just bare subsistence. Then it was capitalism. Now it's capitalism and leisure. Our capitalism feeds our leisure. And I'm not saying, again, that I'm a fan of capitalism. I think there would probably be better systems out there if we were allowed to try them. But at the same time, the motive that capitalism provides people gets them up and going without someone flogging them or scourging them. It may seem like I've gone pretty far afield from my initial premise, but what I'm trying to say to you is, here is a business which avers that it has no social responsibility, telling you that it's going to rewrite the social situation. But what is the social good in that? If they're not going to ask because there's money in it for them, then we need to ask. Conversely, government inherently has a social purpose, the promotion of the general welfare, to borrow from our own Constitution. And to bring this all back home, back full circle to where we started, if someone in a high place says, young Doral Whitey Herzog, you can no longer play baseball. Shuck the flannels, put on the camos, and go out to wherever we send you for reasons, including off to the Middle East, if it were to happen today. And you may die there, but we have chosen to risk your life and perhaps take it directly or indirectly after careful deliberation and in full recognition that if you were to get off by a rocket, it's going to be pretty hard on your wife and your mom and your dog and so on. A soldier isn't a toy, an American isn't a subject, and if we ask to talk to the manager, we get to talk to the manager, and we get an explanation. Briefly, bulletin board, I alluded to this a moment ago. Over at BP, I wrote something called The Dodgers versus the Pinstripe Patosamas. It is about the ongoing CBA negotiation in baseball and just how cynical the owners are being. The comments were interesting. A lot of people think that a salary cap is the solution to competitive imbalance in baseball. First of all, as you'll see both from my essay and from the comments and my responses to them, of which there are several, I don't believe that. I think it's a chimera. I don't think that a salary cap has a damn thing to do with competitive balance. It does transfer money nicely from the players to the owners, but it in no way will change unless it's a radical redistribution in which all is equal. And you can't make all equal. Even if you equalize all revenues, you can't make all equal. The world just doesn't work that way. I don't think it will change a damned thing. Well, except to take pressure off of Pittsburgh owner Bob Nutting, because he won't have to look as bad when the Dodgers outspend him 3-1. Aha, you say, but that is imbalance that the Dodgers can outspend him 3-1. The joke is they don't have to. Number one, I think a lot of that Dodger spending is purely lapidary. The difference between going 81 and 81 and 92 and 70 is about a player and a half. Good ones, I mean. That's not the entire distance from the armpit of the league to the penthouse where the Dodgers, the Yankees, and Mets and so on dwell. It just isn't. Part two is, if the Pirates spent, if the bottom of the league spent, the Dodgers wouldn't be outspending them by 3-1. They'd still be outspending them, but they wouldn't be doing it by an embarrassing ratio. It takes two. And I am tempted to go further, but I don't know if that's what either of us are here for right now, and I would like to let my words over at Baseball Prospectus speak for themselves. I should mention that our editor-in-chief, Greg Goldstein, yanked that sucker out from behind the paywall at BP when it says you need a basic subscription to read this. All basic means is we would like to be able to send you the newsletter, but no cash changes hands. So if you show up there, you click on the link for the piece, which is down about midway on the page now because it's been a day. You click on it and it says it requires a basic subscription. If you don't mind, give them your email address. You don't have to read the newsletter. You can direct the newsletter to your spam file if you want. That's just the way we've had it set up for approximately 17,000 years. I don't know if it's the best way to do things, but I'm not in a position to change it. I can only tell you that I hope you read my work because, as I've often said, I write to be read. And speaking of being read, over at Patreon, Dead Player of the Day Series 2 reached players 97, 98, and 99. I promised 100 on this run. I'll get there next week. I don't know what I'm going to do after that. I'm going to take a break. Some of you have suggested we keep going with these. I might also do some things that encompass more history than just baseball. And our president, our dear Fuhrer, did something tonight, as I say these words, that is kind of inspiring me even more in that direction. I also promise you it will involve judgmental cows, and that's the only hint that I'll give. The players this time around were Fritz Meisel, Highlander, top stolen base guy for the Yankees prior to Rickey Henderson showing up. So for most of 100 years, basically. Earl Averill, but not the Hall of Famer. His kid. In my notes, I've written down Earl Averill Jr., just so I remember who I'm talking about. People throughout his life referred to him as Jr. He wasn't. Earl Averill wasn't Earl Averill. He had a different first name. His son was Earl, had a different middle name. They are not nomenclature twins in any sense. And his son was, of course, a very different player. And finally, possibly the best single season performance by a left-handed pitcher in Cleveland history was authored by this fellow with also a rather unique name for baseball, Veen Gregg. We've had other guys with the Gregg last name. Tommy Gregg, you might remember from the Braves, about 30, 40 years ago at this point. But he was Veen, short for Sylvanus. Tommy Gregg's rookie year, by the way, 1987. So yeah, almost 40 years. My God, am I getting old, is what I'm trying to say here. Funny thing about Tommy Gregg, he didn't hit well, but 1 year, 1990, when I say he didn't hit well, I mean by the standards of a corner guy, which is what he was. But in 1990, last year, before the Braves got good, he pinch hit .353, 18 for 51, with 4 home runs and 17 RBIs. And yet they still lost 97 games. They had Smoltz and Glavine and David Justice and Ron Gant and Tommy Gregg. But we were going to talk about the Red Sox and not their pinch hitters, although would you believe that Rick Miller pinch hit .457 for them in 1983? Yeah, they didn't win anything either. But on the other side, as I said, the fourth greatest mistake, or cell phone, I should say, that's different from a mistake, in Red Sox history. Stay with me, won't you? And I hope to see you on the other side. You know, a Pomeranian is also a small and especially fluffy dog, but I don't think even Otto von Bismarck would have given hand grenades to a dog, would he? Yeah, you're right. Can't put anything past Otto von. As Yip Harburg wrote, Bismarck is a herring, and I promise to throw him back now and move on to more pressing matters. The Red Sox just concluded a 15-game winning streak, matching a franchise best set by the pennant-winning 1946 team. Prior to that, they bested the 13-game winning streak experienced by the very nearly pennant-winning 1948 team, and that's what we're here to discuss, the very nearly part. When that club was mentioned, it struck me that we had never talked at length about one of the greatest of unsolved mysteries of baseball, one which I don't think can or will ever be solved. Having gone through this story now, I'm not really convinced that there's a mystery, but let's work through it together, shall we? Let's start with the facts on the ground. The 1948 American League pennant race was a three-way snarl between Boston, New York, and Cleveland. And I should pause here to mention that I usually do verbal somersaults to avoid using the Indians' name. On a personal level, I am very glad that it's gone. I dislike this collective misnomer for a disparate group of Native American populations. I dislike the appropriation and lame excuses for it, and I especially dislike the Chief Wahoo caricature that owner Bill Veeck introduced around this time, specifically 1948. However, it was the team's name at the time. Every quote I might give you from back then uses it. And this might just be the foolish consistency that is the hobgoblin of small minds, but it bugs me if I say the Yankees, the Red Sox, and Cleveland. Thus, I'm going to use Indians today, and I hope you understand why I'm being inconsistent with my usual practice. With a week to go in the season, the race was a flat tie with all three teams possessing a 91-56 record. The Yankees and Red Sox finished up with 2 games at Fenway Park. The Yankees, who had dropped 2 games off the pace, needed to sweep to get themselves into a tie-breaking playoff position. Boston won those games decisively. In light of later events, we should note that Ted Williams hit .367 with a .490 on base and a .542 slugging percentage in September and went 4 for 6 in the 2 games, hitting 3 doubles and a home run and drawing 4 walks. So much for Ted never being clutch, as the Boston writers like to say. The Red Sox needed to win those 2 games not only to stay ahead of the Yankees, but to catch up with the Indians, who had gone up by 2 in the loss column. They had 4 games left, 1 with the White Sox, 3 at home against the Tigers. They won the last game against Chicago, then split the first 2 against Detroit. That left them 1 game ahead of Boston with 1 game to play. All they had to do was win that game, and they'd clinch the pennant. They did not, dropping a battle of future Hall of Famers Bob Feller versus Hal Newhouser. Newhouser held Cleveland to 3 hits and no runs through 8 innings. He weakened in the 9th, and Cleveland chained up a couple of singles and a so-called productive out to tally 1 run. But by then, Detroit had scored 7, so it was a moot run. The regular season was over. The Yankees were cleaning out their lockers and going home, and the Red Sox and Indians were tied. The pennant race would be resolved with a 1-game playoff to be played the day after the regular season ended at Fenway Park because the Red Sox had won the coin toss. Now the question was, who was going to pitch this winner-take-all game for Boston? The Red Sox were managed by veteran skipper Joe McCarthy. To that point, and to this day, one of the most successful managers in baseball history. He was 61 years old, had been managing for over 30 years, and had 9 pennants and 7 World Series titles. Eat your heart out, Tony La Russa. He was in his first year with the Red Sox after 16 years. Running the New York Yankees, he had left because the team had been sold to a triumvirate led by the heavy-drinking, high-pressure Larry MacPhail. McCarthy was a much more benign form of heavy drinker. He was actually more of a low-pressure personality. He believed in setting standards and being stern about enforcing them, but he wasn't someone who was going to rant at you, and he didn't like being ranted at himself, which was what Larry MacPhail did about 98% of the time. Plus, just, you're a middle-aged man, you've been doing this all your life, you've soothed your nerves with way too much scotch, you find yourself starting to fall short of your own professional standards, and you realize you're about to break. And so he took a year off, said, my doctors don't want me to do this anymore, I'm going home. And then Tom Yawkey said, I need to buy the best manager in the business, I bought the best everything else, except for players of color. Well, come on down. So he did. And the Red Sox, with a very solid offense and a solid enough pitching staff, won 96 games. McCarthy was, as much as possible, a set lineup guy, and the playoff game was no different. He played his standard lineup. Dom DiMaggio in center field, Johnny Pesky at third base, batting second, Teddy Ballgame in left and batting third, shortstop Vern Stevens batting cleanup, Bobby Doerr, second baseman in the 5th spot, right fielder Stan Spence batting 6th, first baseman Billy Goodman batting 7th, and catcher Bertie Tebbetts batting 8th. More about Bertie shortly. As for the pitcher, well, okay, that's the complicated part. McCarthy used a 5-man rotation for most of the season. As with most teams, the rotation underwent some changes throughout the season, and occasionally he would push someone on 3 days rest so he could skip the 5th starter, whoever that was going to be, but mostly the pitchers did work on 4 days rest. By the end of the campaign, the rotation was second-year lefty Mel Parnell. I guess a better way to say that is he was a young pitcher in his first full season. Veteran righty Joe Dobson, late-blooming righty Ellis Old Folks Kinder, and one last veteran righty, Jack Kramer. The 5th guy, at least in the second half, was 36-year-old journeyman Denny Galehouse, also right-handed. You tried not to pitch lefties at Fenway back then. They were almost superstitious about it because of the Green Monster. In 9 games down the stretch, Galehouse went 4-2 with a 3.67 ERA, but that decent-sounding ERA hides his being absolutely thumped, allowing 75 hits and 21 walks in 56 1/3 innings. Batters hit .328 against him. Because the race was unsettled, McCarthy couldn't spare his pitchers, couldn't set up his rotation for that potential playoff game. Everyone had been worked and worked hard. The writers asked McCarthy, as of game 154, as of that win, who would pitch the playoff game. But he refused to answer, saying he hadn't made up his mind and didn't want to deceive anybody. Maybe I'll get the word tonight in a dream, or better still, find some nice little man and rub his curly head. It makes me so uncomfortable, that last. This head-rubbing thing comes up in old movies and, of course, in Texas Rangers games played by Adrian Beltre. There's a 1931 Edward G. Robinson film that plays on Turner Classics quite often, Smart Money. You don't need me to tell you that quite often old pictures are problematic from a racial point of view, but in this one, Robinson plays a gambler, and there's one person of color in the whole film, more or less, and Robinson is always asking to rub his head before he throws the dice. What's wrong with that? I think it's dehumanizing. The way the rotation had lined up, McCarthy had 3 choices for the playoff assignment. He could use Parnell on 3 days rest. He had pitched to a 3.24 ERA down the stretch, but as I said, he was also in his first full major league season, wasn't that experienced, might well have been gassed. He could pitch Kinder on full rest. Kinder had posted a 3.34 ERA in August and September, but like Galehouse, he had been hittable. It wasn't to the same extent, but it was there. And finally, there was Galehouse, who had last started 16 days earlier and had last pitched at all 9 games earlier. In a game, that is. There's a caveat to that. Overall, that year, the league average ERA was 4.29. Dobson was 16-10 with a 3.56 ERA. Parnell 15-8 with a 3.14 ERA. Kramer was 18-5 with a 4.35 ERA, but keep in mind he was pitching at Fenway, so you probably should discount that sum. You should discount everybody's sum. Kinder was 10-7 with a 3.74 ERA, and finally Galehouse was 8-7 with a 3.82 ERA. Now I want to pause and mention something that seemingly would have nothing to do with this. It's Howard Emke. You know the legend of Emke, washed-up athletics pitcher on the 1929 pennant winners. A former 20-game winner, Howard was all but washed up. But he said he thought he had one more great game in him. Okay, said Connie Mack. We're going to play the Cubs in the World Series. Go scout them and we'll see. So Emke followed the Cubs and Connie Mack worked one of his miracles. Instead of one of his aces, among whom numbered Lefty Grove, still a good candidate for greatest pitcher of all time, he called on Howard for Game 1, and old Ragarm Howard stunned the Cubbies with a 1-run, 13 strikeout performance. That Cubs team was managed by Joe McCarthy. At the risk of spoiling the story, the 1948 story, I mean, although my Emke illusion may have given the ending away, McCarthy chose the least likely suspect to start the game, Denny Galehouse, winner take all. The players had the expectation it would be Mel Parnell. Parnell had the expectation it would be Parnell and made sure to go to bed early. Parnell claimed that when he got to the clubhouse for the game, the ball was under his cap, meaning he'd be starting. However, during batting practice, Joe McCarthy came to him and said, "Son, I'm sorry. I've changed my mind. The wind is blowing out, so the elements are against the left-hander." On the other side of the field, Cleveland player manager, I should say, Lou Boudreau, Mr. Hunch, had chosen to start Gene Bearden, left-handed knuckleballer. Lou Boudreau did not fear the Green Monster. Maybe that's why, later on, when he managed the Red Sox, he was a total disaster, but for this day, it didn't hurt him any, and it didn't hurt Cleveland any. Galehouse was the senior man on the staff. He had a career record of 109-17 with a 3.96 ERA. He had World Series experience, having started 2 games in the 1944 World Series and allowed only 3 runs in 18 innings. Back on July 30th, Cleveland had knocked Parnell out in the first. Galehouse came on and pitched 8 2/3 innings of 2-hit, 1-run baseball. That made an impression. On the other hand, he had made 2 other appearances against Cleveland after that and been thwacked each time. He had also warmed up so often in Game 154 that he later claimed to have pitched 6 innings in the bullpen. And also he was Denny Galehouse, aging junk baller. So you know what happened next. Galehouse was good for all of 2 batters. Then he allowed a home run to, who else? Future AL MVP, by future I mean weeks away, Lou Boudreau, who was completing one of the great shortstop series in history. The Sox came back with a run in the bottom of the inning to tie things up. All remained equal into the top of the 4th when Boudreau singled, Joe Gordon, another future Hall of Famer, singled, and third baseman Ken Keltner hit a 3-run homer. At that point, McCarthy called to the bullpen for Kinder, but it was too late. The Red Sox went home, the Indians went on to play the Braves in the World Series, and won the last championship in franchise history to date, which is its own sad story. Now, let's rewind. Was the wind really why McCarthy audibled from Parnell to Galehouse? And what about Kinder? He would pitch 6 innings in that final, fatal game, allowing 3 earned runs on 8 hits, plus 1 more that was unearned, including a second home run to Boudreau. Somebody hosed that man down. The concern with old folks was that Cleveland had beaten on him pretty badly earlier in the campaign, and that was true. His most recent appearance against them had come at Cleveland on August 1st, and he hadn't made it out of the 2nd inning, Cleveland tallying 8 runs against him, including a 2-run homer by Larry Doby. As for Parnell, he was only 3-2 against Cleveland, but with a good 3.32 ERA. He had also pitched to a 2.21 ERA at Fenway versus a 4.13 ERA on the road. Cleveland had good right-handed hitters like Keltner, Gordon, and Boudreau, and none of them had any problem reaching base against him, so perhaps that was a consideration as well. And then there's this, the secret opt-out factor. It sounds ridiculous to me. It was embarrassing to the players that people talked about it, but it was also validated by 2 of the people involved. This is the mystery that will never be solved unless Bertie Tebbett's diaries come to light. And by his own testimony, there were, perhaps are, diaries. And we will look for them. We will search for the Tebbett's diaries right after this short break. No doubt some of you are old enough to remember the Hitler diaries hoax. Well, this is sort of the same idea, except a lot more benign, and to me, more important. George Bertie Tebbetts was a lifetime baseball man, a glove-first catcher who spent about 90% of his career batting 8th, but was smart enough to take a walk if the opposing team wanted to work around him to get to the pitcher. He began with the Tigers and was the starting catcher on the 1940 AL pennant winners. He lost 3 years to the Second World War, which is fine. A lot of people lost many more years than that, like all of them. And in 1947, he was traded to the Red Sox in return for Hal Wagner, a very similar player who didn't last nearly as long in the majors. After retiring as a player in 1952, Tebbetts had a decade plus managing in the big leagues with the Reds, Braves, and, yes, the Indians. Some of his teams were pretty good. The 1956 Reds won 91 games, and the 1965 Indians won 87, which doesn't sound like much, but at that point, the Cleveland team was in a kind of death spiral that lasted decades. My saying that reminds me of the late 70s Disney movie The Black Hole, a kind of Star Wars-inspired picture, and the novelization thereof, in which veteran science fiction writer Alan Dean Foster did his level best to make coherent the film's utterly incomprehensible ending, and didn't quite succeed. No fault of his own, that one. Bertie's managerial career wrapped up in 1966, at least in the majors, but after that he scouted and managed in the minors until he was nearly 80. He left this world in 1999. He promised that he would explain the Galehouse matter in his diaries, but I have yet to see them. Not that I'm first in line or anything, but we've been waiting for quite the while now. If you read military histories, you'll sometimes pick up a judgmental thread that goes like this. The commanding general commands on his own. He doesn't pull his subordinate generals together, hold councils of war, and make decisions based on majority vote. He analyzes the situation and makes the calls himself, or he's indecisive and weak. I don't know if I agree with that. And like a lot of things, it seems to me that the rightness or wrongness of it is context dependent. Between the majors and the minors, Joe McCarthy managed for 32 seasons. As far as I know, he did not do this. And as I'm sure you know, the tradition at the time was that teams had one or two coaches, not 79 like today. Like many managers of his time, he didn't have a wholly standardized rotation. That's because with doubleheaders and long train trips, it was hard to do that, and sometimes it would have been disadvantageous. Throw in the usual raft of pitcher injuries that every manager has to deal with in every season, and none of his teams look like the turn of the 1970s Orioles with 5 guys, and you could count on that. Cuellar, McNally, Phoebus, Palmer, sometimes Harden, plus a grand total of 3 spot starts from Marcelino Lopez. Exactly one Joe McCarthy Yankees team had 3 pitchers get to 30 starts. In 1936, Red Ruffing, Lefty Gomez, and Monty Pearson got there. The World Series winning 1941 Yankees, on the other hand, used 10 starting pitchers. Marius Russo started 27 times. That led the team. Ruffing and Gomez, 23 times each. Spud Chandler and Atlee Swampy Donald, 20 times each, and so on. With that kind of instability, McCarthy was pitching starters day by day based on matchups, which is to say that what happened, the decision-making process that occurred in 1948, was nothing new to him. Here's a 7-game stretch from early August of 1941. The starting pitchers were Ruffing, Donald, Steve Peek, Russo, Chandler, Marv Brewer, and then Lefty Gomez. That's a 7-man rotation, if you can call it a rotation at all. He did that all year, except Peek got dropped in favor of Episode 1 Infinite Inning Metaphor Tiny Bonham, said team president and general manager Ed Barrow at precisely that moment. He took a diverse group of players and molded it into a winning unit. He made a winning pitching staff out of mediocre hurlers. McCarthy didn't go around the clubhouse asking, "Anyone want to pitch tomorrow? Please?" The pitchers came into the clubhouse each morning, and as Parnell described earlier, one of them found a ball under his cap and knew he was going that day. Except, maybe, for 1948 Red Sox game 155, perhaps it wasn't as simple as just deciding. Supposedly, following their game 154 victory, McCarthy asked Tebbetts to canvass the pitchers as to who wanted to pitch the playoff game. Tebbetts then toddled off and talked to all of them, and all of them begged off except for Denny Galehouse. "Oh, my arm hurts. Oh, my mother-in-law is coming over and I won't have time." It sounds like the kid's story of the little red hen. "Who will help me pitch the game?" "Not I," said the pig. "Not I," said the cat. "Not I," said the prehistoric man-eating terror bird, rising to its full height of 10 feet. In some versions of the story, once Tebbetts reported back, McCarthy dramatically turned over a piece of paper on his desk, showing that he had written Denny Galehouse down as his starter for 155. He was so attuned to his staff that he knew ahead of time what their reaction would be. Years later, as if to support that idea, McCarthy said in an interview, "The truth is, I didn't have anybody else." Now, Parnell said that the foregoing scenario was a flat lie invented by the baseball writers. He said McCarthy never gave anyone a choice about whether to pitch or not, that none of the pitchers would have begged off in any case, and that this change was just an impulse McCarthy had based on the weather or some other idea that he had. After, he said McCarthy apologized in a sense, once the game was lost, I mean. "I've made a mistake," he said. "I'll just have to live with it." Teammates backed Parnell in later years, saying Parnell and Kinder were both up to start the game. Bobby Dorr said the entire team expected Parnell to start as well. So did McCarthy just go with his instinct or get the idea from touching the curly hair of a stranger? Or was it really that all those pitchers had said, "Oh no, not me"? As hard as it is to imagine a major league pitcher doing that, imagine Bobby Cox sending, who would it have been? Javi Lopez, Greg Olson into the Braves clubhouse to say, Greg Maddux, do you want to pitch the game? No? How about you, John Smoltz? Have some kind of conflict, an appointment at that time? A haircut. Okay. Tom Glavine, will you pitch that game? No? Steve Avery? No? Charlie Lee Brandt. And that explains why they lost a whole bunch of World Series, I guess. Galehouse was around until 1998, and he wasn't adverse to talking about this. And while he didn't specifically throw anyone else under the bus, he said that the night before, Tebbetts hinted to him very strongly that he'd be starting on the basis that we just discussed, that everyone else had abdicated. On the other hand, that supports both theories of the case. Maybe Tebbetts said that because he'd surveyed the other pitchers and they truly said no, or he said it because he knew from talking to McCarthy that that's the way that Joe was leaning. And that brings us back to the Tebbetts diaries. Tebbetts lived for more than another half century, but refused to discuss this, acting as if it were this great, shameful secret that he had to keep to protect other people. And yet, simultaneously, he also kind of dismissed it. In his memoir, which was never really finished and was posthumously published, if I recall correctly, Birdie, Confessions of a Baseball Nomad, he said he asked one of the pitchers, "Are you going to start the game?" And the pitcher replied, "I hope not." Well, so what? But to Birdie, that was a shameful thing, I guess. That was a cowardly remark. And yet, if it was Mel Parnell who said that, then it still left Ellis Kinder starting on full rest. If it was Ellis Kinder who said it, it left Parnell starting on 3 days rest. And if it was Smokey Joe Wood who said it, well, he was 57 years old and had been retired for 26 years, so what did it matter? What was he even doing there? Came for Old Timers Day and never went home, just haunted the clubhouse. Possessed by the ghost of Chick Stahl. There's another, even better explanation. His voice sounded really scary when he said it too, what with all the carbolic acid he poured in there. Too soon? In the book, Birdie's co-author actually interrupts the story to include a little dialogue that he had with Birdie, essentially saying, well, what happened, really? And Tebbetts just wouldn't go into it. He added, "You don't indict your own teammates if there is to be an indictment, because, as far as I'm concerned, there is none." To paraphrase Abbott and Costello, I don't even know what he's talking about. Here is the rest of what Tebbetts said in the book about the Galehouse decision. "Everybody says that after we found out we were tied with Cleveland, McCarthy called me into his office, which was true, but they also say that he sent me out to find out who wanted to pitch the playoff game the next day, which is not true. The conversation that we had in there was something I just don't think I'll talk about. But there's one thing I do know. That is that Joe McCarthy didn't need somebody to give him any advice at a time like that. The story of why he picked Denny Galehouse is so logical and clear that I just don't understand why it hasn't been explained by some of these so-called expert journalists who are so completely dependent upon statistics. Stats are a great thing, but they only take you so far, and then your own logic and experience has to guide you to a decision. I will say this. I have written the reasoning of Joe McCarthy in my diaries, and they are there to be read and pondered after I'm gone, if anybody cares. But his decision was so completely rational, I don't understand why nobody has figured it out. First, if anyone cares, I care, Birdie. I really do. This one bugs me. Second of all, I just gave you the statistics. I like my statistics. I still don't know what he's talking about. And I don't know where his diaries are. It seems to me that the statistics argue against everyone equally, so he had to pick someone. They didn't argue any more strongly for Denny Galehouse than they did against Kinder or Parnell. And isn't another cliche of managing that you dance with the one what brung ya? And again, say there's an extra statistical thing, an off-the-field thing. Kinder came in drunk. I don't know that to be the fact, but let's say he did. You still had Parnell. Parnell came in drunk. You still had Kinder. Did they both come in drunk? And by drunk, I really mean hungover. And McCarthy, who had managed Grover Cleveland Alexander none too happily, knew from pitchers who were hungover and knew that they could win games when they needed to. The 1946 Red Sox, under Joe Cronin, McCarthy's general manager, lost the 7th game of the World Series, a one-run game. That happens sometimes. But it was a big deal for the Red Sox because they hadn't won since 1918 and wouldn't win again until 2004. Pesky was the GOAT in that one for hesitating during Country Slaughter's go-ahead dash from first to home But really, Game 7 losses, particularly one-run losses, just happen. They're dice rolls of the universe. Personally, I wouldn't rank that high up on the list of Boston Red Sox cell phones. I wouldn't put trading Babe Ruth up there either, because that wasn't even a baseball move, and it wasn't a mistake. It wasn't done to gain an advantage. It was a financial thing, and Harry Frazee partly did it so he could pay off his ex-wife, partly despite AL President Ban Johnson, who had interfered with his running of the franchise one too many times. And then there's this. I don't even know if I feel comfortable with the assumptions we would have to make to call the Gale House decision an all-time Red Sox screw-up, because although it didn't work, we can't argue in the alternative and know for certain that Parnell or Kinder could have done any better. McCarthy didn't think so, so maybe McCarthy just had a handful of deuces. There was just nowhere for him to go. As he said, I had nobody else. Look at Clayton Kershaw's record in the postseason. You would pick him every time. If Joe McCarthy had him available that day, he would have picked him too, and he would have had to eat it. That said, it just didn't work. And it was and is an easy second guess because Gale House was the least qualified guy of the three pitchers available. Now, I'd rank it below Tom Yaki's refusal to integrate in a real way for about 30 years, not pulling Bill Buckner from Game 6, 1986, and perhaps below trading Mookie Betts because the impact of that decision has lasted for years. What do you say, Red Sox Nation? Do you realize that the tallest prehistoric terror birds were almost twice as tall as Bertie Tebbetts, who was 5'11"? That's pretty scary. Should you wish to be tall enough to follow me on social media, then stand on your tiptoes and reach for stephengoldman.bsky.social. You can also write us, by which I mean me, at infiniteinning@gmail.com. The Facebook group remains. Go to Facebook, search on Infinite Inning, bang, you're there. Please, no pictures of your toes. Should you wish to support the show, and I very much hope you do, as we roll on at Patreon, please visit patreon.com/theinfiniteinning. Gear of a rudimentary kind, available at the-infinite-inning.creator-spring.com. Soundtrack available gratis at casualobservermusic.bandcamp.com. Finally, should you find yourself with the proverbial moment to spare, please go to the podcatcher of your choice and rate, review, and subscribe. And if your podcatcher doesn't let you do those things, then ask yourself, what is the social good of a podcatcher? Especially if they consume all your town's drinking water to fuel their podcatching needs. That's more of an AI thing, but still. Our theme song, which you are hearing now and have been listening to throughout the episode, was a co-composition of myself and Dr. Rick Mooring, who says, they weren't man-eating terror birds. There were no Homo sapiens then. It was an Australopithecus eating terror bird at best. And no, I'm not being pedantic. I'm a scientist. Well, if I can just evolve past my hurt at that remark, I'll be back next week with more tales from inside the Infinite Inning.